This is Pastor Hayes again, ready to let's share in the Word together, and I'm glad that you're here. I want to take a look today in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 29, and it says some real good things here for us. It says this. It says, "Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that it may minister grace unto the hearers. And grieve not the Holy Spirit of God, whereby ye are sealed unto the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you, and with all malice." So he's sharing with us here about kindness, gentleness, kindness. Gentleness, kindness. That's even one of the fruits of the Spirit found in Galatians 5 and 22. And so we see here kindness. A few years ago, a cosmetic company sponsored a promotion which people were asked to submit a picture of who they thought was one of the most beautiful women in the world. Well, thousands of letters and thousands of pictures came in. One particular letter came in from a young boy who had it captured a lot of attention, and it was shown to the president of the company, and what he wrote was very obvious that it was a boy from maybe a broken home. It probably stayed with his father, an old rundown neighborhood. He was writing about a woman, and he said this. He said, "A beautiful woman lives down the street from me, and I visit her every day. She makes me feel like I'm important, and not only that, but she makes me feel like I'm the most important kid in the world. We play checkers, and she listens to my problems, and she understands me, and when I leave, she yells out the door that she's proud of me." He enclosed a picture and wrote, "This picture shows you that she is the most beautiful woman in the world." Well, intrigued, the president said, "Let me see the picture of this woman that's supposed to be the most beautiful woman in the world." Secretary handed him the photograph, and as he looked at the photograph, he saw this woman with a big smile on her face who was totally toothless, very much up so in years. She was sitting in a wheelchair, and she had gray kind of stringy hair. It was pulled back in a bun, had wrinkles on her face that seemed to fade away because she had this great big smile and these little twinkles in her eyes. And the president looked at the photograph, and he said, "We just can't use this entry because it shows the world that you don't have to have our products in order to necessarily be beautiful." Well, I think he's right, because there's a beauty and an attractiveness that goes beyond just mere what you see on the outside. There's an inner beauty that can come through people, and I believe this lady had an inner beauty that just came through her eyes and came through her face. It wasn't a beauty that makeup could give. It wasn't a beauty that is just a natural kind of thing on the outside, but she had such a beautiful inside, and the beauty on the inside came out on the outside. And there's a kindness and a gentleness and a concern and a love that can be seen in people around us. That's a whole lot more in the way of beauty than just someone who just looks just really good on the outside. Somebody wrote into a newspaper one time. It used to be the different things that have landers and different articles and things people write in the newspapers and stuff. And one woman wrote this. She said, "Dear Ann, I'm a 46-year-old woman, divorced, 3 grown children. After several months of chemotherapy, following a mastectomy for breast cancer, I was starting to put my life back together again when the doctor called me with the results of the last checkup. They had found more cancer, and I was devastated. My relatives had not been very supportive of me, and they somehow felt like that maybe my cancer was contagious. Instead of coming over to see me, they would just call me on the phone, and it was just all such a long distance, and I never did see any of them, and that kind of hurt me. She said, last Saturday I went to the laundromat, and course, you know, you see the same people there every week when you go to the laundromat, and they exchange greetings and small talk. And she said, I pulled up in the parking lot and was determined that not to look depressed and not to let my spirits look like they were down. And while taking my laundry out of the car, she said, I saw a man who was one of the regulars. I'd seen him there often. As he was leaving with his bundle in his hand, he smiled at me and he said, good morning. How are you today? And she said, suddenly I lost control of myself and blurted out and said, sir, this probably is one of the worst days of my entire life. She said, I have more cancer. And I began to cry. She said he put his arm around me and we both sobbed. Then he said, I understand. He said, my wife has been through it as well. And after a few minutes, she said, I felt a little better and stammered out a thank you and proceeded into the laundromat with my laundry. About 15 minutes later, she said he came back with his wife. And without saying a word, here this person I had never met before walked over to me and put her arms around me and gave me a big hug. She looked at me and she said, you know, I've been there too. Feel free to talk with me. She says, I know some of what you're going through. She said, I can't tell you how much that meant to me. Here was a total stranger taking her time to give me emotional support and to encourage me and to encourage my future when I was ready to just totally give up. She said, I hope God gives me a chance to do for someone else what this woman and her husband has done for me. She said, meanwhile, let your readers know that even though there are a lot of hard-hearted people in the world, there are also some incredibly tremendous people in the world as well. A lot of different people in the world, aren't there? Apostle Paul wrote in Ephesians 4:29 through 31, he said, do not let the unwholesome talk, don't let unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only that which is helpful for building up others according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Get rid of bitterness, rage, anger, brawling, slander, along with every form of malice. See, there are people all around who are bitter, who are angry. People who are angry at the world because they feel like they're not getting enough, they're not getting their fair share. There are people who are angry with God because they feel like that He's treated them unfairly. There are people who are angry with their spouses because it seems like marriage didn't bring them what they thought it was going to bring them. There are people who are angry with their children, angry with their neighbors, angry with their job. There are people out there who are just angry. And Paul gives us a message here. And he says, if you want to make it, you can't live with a life filled with anger, because it will totally eat you alive. And then in the next verse, he gives an antidote. He says, rid yourself of hostility. Strive to rid yourself of anger. Strive to rid yourself of unwholesome words. Be kind, compassionate one to another, forgiving each other as Christ had also forgiven you. Let me share a story with you. It's going to take me a little bit to do that, and I know people lengthy stories a lot of times, but let me just, I'm going to share, this says something. I'd like to share a story with you, and it talks about the importance of a simple act of kindness, and how just one simple act of kindness can change a whole person's life. A young man writes, he said, one day when I was a freshman in high school, he said, I saw a kid from my class who was walking home. He said his name was Kyle. Looked like he was carrying every book that he had in his whole locker. It looked like he cleaned the whole thing out. And he said, I thought to myself, what in the world would somebody want to be carrying all of their books home, particularly on a Friday? And the first thing he thought of is, this has to be what they call a nerd. He said, myself, I had quite a weekend plan. He said, I planned to go to the football game, parties afterwards. You know, I'd meet with my friends tomorrow afternoon. And he said, when I looked at this guy, I just kind of went, oh man, why in the world would somebody want to take all their books home with them? He said, I shrugged my shoulders and I just kind of went on my way. But he says, as I was walking home, I noticed there was a bunch of guys that ran over to Kyle. I mean, they just ran right into him. They knocked him down on the ground, and his books went flying out of his arms, and his glasses landed in the grass. And I saw him hit the ground hard, and he looked up with this terrible sadness in his eyes. He said, my heart went out to him when I saw that. So I jogged over to him, and I crawled around looking for his glasses. And when I got to him, he said there were tears in his eyes. And I handed him his glasses and said, you know, those guys, they're just a bunch of jerks. They really ought to go somewhere and get some real lives somewhere. He said, Kyle looked at me and he said, hey, he said, thanks, I appreciate that. And he kind of forced a smile on his face, like one of those smiles that kind of said, you know, I really am grateful for what you just did for me. He said, I helped him pick up his books and asked him where he lived. And he says, it turned out he lived close to me. He says, so I asked him, I said, I've never seen you before. I've never seen you in school before. He said, are you new? He said, well, I've been going to private school. He said, I haven't been to public school very much. Most of the time I'm in private school, and I'm kind of back in public school now. He went, he said, well, I've never hung out with private school kid before. And so he said, we walked home and I carried some of his books. And he said, as Kyle and I talked, I began to find out he actually was a pretty cool guy. He really was kind of nice. And I asked him if he wanted to play football with my friends. He said, oh yeah, that'd be good. And he said, we hung out all weekend. And he said, the more I got to know Kyle, he said, the more I liked him. And he said, not only that, but my friends liked him too. He said, Monday eventually came around and there was Kyle with his big stack of books. And so I stopped and said, man, you're going to really build some serious muscle with all those books that you've got. And he laughed and handed half of them to me, and I helped him carry them to school. He said, over the next 4 years, Kyle and I became best friends. He said we were seniors, and by the time 4 years were up, he said, we began to think about college, and Kyle had decided he was going to go to Georgetown. He said, I decided I would go to Duke. And he said, I knew that we would always be friends and that the miles would be a problem because we wouldn't be seeing each other anymore. He said he had decided he was going to be a doctor, and I decided I was going to be a businessman. And so he said he was going to go to school to be a doctor, and he said I had gotten a football scholarship to a college there at Duke. He said, it come to find out that Kyle ended up being the valedictorian of the class. That meant that he got to do the graduation speech. He said I teased Kyle about being a nerd, and he had to prepare for a speech for graduation. He said, I'm so glad I didn't have to prepare for that. On graduation day, he said, I saw Kyle. He said he looked great. He says one of those guys that had really found himself during high school. He filled out good. I said he actually looked good in his glasses. He said he had more dates with girls than I did, and he said because of that I became a little jealous. But he said today was graduation day. Today was one of those days. He said I could see he was nervous about his speech, so I slapped him on the back and said, all right, big guy, you'll do great. I know it'll be all right. He looked at me with one of those looks, one of those grateful smiles that he knew how to give, and he went, thanks, I appreciate that. As he started his speech, he cleared his throat, and he began. He said, graduation is a time to thank those who helped you through many of your tough years. Your parents, your teachers, your siblings, maybe a coach, but mostly your friends. He said, I'm here to tell you that being a friend to someone is the best gift that they can ever give to you. He said, I want to tell you a story. He said he looked over at me as he began to share his story. And he says, there's a person who had become my friend, who helped me. He said on a certain weekend, on a Friday at the close of school, he said I had planned to kill myself over that particular weekend. He talked of how he had cleaned out his locker with all of his books so his mom wouldn't have to come back to school later and clean his locker out. Carry his stuff home. He said he looked hard over at me, and he said I gave him a little smile. He said, thankfully, because of a friend giving me a kind word, he said he saved me from doing the unspeakable. Heard a gasp go through the crowd as this handsome, popular young man now is sharing with the entire school his greatest weakness. He said, I saw his mom and dad look over at me and smiling with a grateful smile. And he said, it wasn't until that moment that I realized the depth of one act of kindness. What an impact this young man had on Kyle's life. He didn't realize the depth of his kindness until it had been revealed on this graduation day. No doubt he came to realize the true gratefulness of this young man and how powerful one act of kindness can be. What an awesome thing kindness is. What a fruit of blessing to those who need it the most. See, kindness is an outflow of God's love and grace that He gives to us and imparts within us. And it's grace in the first degree. Webster's Dictionary defines kindness as disposed to do good to others and make them happy. Having tenderness or goodness, a good nature, benevolent, friendly, proceeding from or dictated by the tenderness of a good heart. Therefore, kindness is an action of goodwill and benevolence. With that understanding, we consider the thought of the quality that takes place when we deliver a true kindness. In the Bible, we see the story of the Good Samaritan. Through kindness, he delivered a man who had fallen among thieves and was left for dead. Instead of passing him by and just going on his way, he immediately acted and bound up his wounds and poured oil and wine into his wound. Back then, wine was the only antiseptic that they have. And so he bound him up and he carried him safely to a place where he could get some help and paid his bill. And he said, if there's anything else that I owe you upon my return trip back this way, he said, I will pay you if there's any extra. In the Old Testament, we find a man by the name of Boaz, who delivered a little Moabite girl named Ruth through the power of kindness, leaving handfuls for her. And little did she know that one day this little Moabite girl would find her place in the lineage of the Lord Jesus Christ. David, King David in the Old Testament, delivered one of the sons of Saul, whose name was Mephibosheth, through kindness. And it was custom when a new king came on the throne that they killed all the relatives and all those from the old king so they wouldn't rebel against him. But David said, is there any left in Saul's house in which that I can show kindness to? And he found out a little place called Lodabar. little place, a dry desert place. And he found Mephibosheth, and he had these crippled feet, and he couldn't walk. And David had him brought to Jerusalem and had him put his crippled legs underneath the king's banquet table for the rest of his life. The power of being kind. The power of showing kindness. Kindness can be a powerful thing. And I want to ask today, who would you deliver today or maybe tomorrow through one random act of kindness? Whose life maybe would you save by one act of kindness that you would show to them? One writer said, never underestimate the power of your actions. With one small gesture, we can change a person's life. See, God puts us in each other's lives to impact one another, to pollinate and touch each other's life. It's been said that friends are angels who lift us to our feet when our wings have trouble remembering how to fly. We have the opportunity today to deliver the power of kindness to someone this week. And who knows what a kindness that we may show today may affect someone's life tomorrow. This is Pastor Hayes, bringing you words of life. The Lord bless you, and we'll see you again.